What's up, Java Beans? Welcome back to Gacha Box, the show where we review video game commercials from a marketing perspective. If you're new around here, welcome, glad to have you. If you're coming back, irashaimase, which is what you get for subscribing to the channel. You get to be greeted very aggressively in Japanese. Today, we have our first break away from Nintendo commercials. We've been really focusing on Nintendo at the start here, so of course, why not just jump over to the Sega Genesis? See what their marketing strategy was like, how was it different than Nintendo, and from a marketing perspective, what are they focusing on in terms of the three major marketing types, which I'll go ahead and put up here for you. Hope you enjoyed that. That was great. Hope you learned a lot. Anyways, let's get to it. All right, Sega Genesis commercials from the 80s. Ready? Let's go.
And so it was, late in the 20th century, that a pot fell upon the land. A plague of home videos that were limited in intelligence. There was brain drain, and terminal boredom swept the countryside.
Huh.
It was down, and what might be by what it saw. This is not good.
Okay. Plague of boredom.
Brought forth Genesis, a system with twice the power, twice the intelligence, twice the challenge, twice the fun. Only a few recall forth to experience this new dimension of high definition graphics and stereo sound.
Focusing on the idea of twice as a selling point is probably a competition with Nintendo thing.
Now that's not bad. Discover Genesis, and your world will never be the same.
All right. So, wow, this next one looks like it's just going to be a repeat of the last one. All right, so what we had here is we're going for interesting imagery. I'm not sure it's reaching the level of shock necessary to be its own standing image. That opening image of like the boys' faces being shown in bright light, standing or sitting in a row, looking very nonplussed and bored. I think that is probably the one image that's going to stand out the most. They're also then, with the pullback shot, they're talking about how there's like a disease across the land, that it's going to, that their boredom is an epidemic of sorts that needs to be cured, even though the boys already have games that they're playing. And that's going to be an important factor here, in that they're bored and playing games, which means the idea is the games that they're playing aren't good enough, which will cycle back into the sort of this competitive identity marketing that they're very casually directing at Nintendo when it says that it's twice the power, twice the everything. They're saying that the Genesis is 2 times as good as what was the market standard at the time, the Nintendo. At the same time, it's very strange that they are using this appeal to ancient wisdom like it is an unearthed secret that needs to be discovered from the past. And that can lend itself to a sort of an air, a tone of grandeur. I also find it very strange that, say like the Nintendo was marketing itself as the future. And so Sega Genesis seems to be doing exactly the opposite of that, marketing itself as ancient wisdom, at the same time as saying it's twice as good as Nintendo. Marketing doesn't need to make sense, it just needs to be a bigger image, a more memorable image than what your opponent is doing. But there really wasn't anything in terms of, say, just explaining the quality of the thing. It was saying it was twice as good, but it wasn't actually explaining like what that means. And at the same time, it didn't have anything about like the amount of product you're getting for the price as part of its marketing pitch, which means there isn't any of marketing type 1. The main marketing type that we're seeing here is that marketing type 2, getting you to associate the Sega Genesis with ancient wisdom, a solution to a problem, the problem being boredom. And the cause of boredom, from the commercial being a little bit cheeky, a little bit saucy here, is that other video games are what is causing boredom, and the Sega Genesis is the answer to that. Now, this next commercial here looks like it's coming right off the heels of the last commercial we just watched. I don't even know if it's a new commercial, so let's look. Let's see.
What's the hottest hottest 16-bit video game system with true arcade games, great graphics, real challenge, stereo sound, and the hottest library too, with games like Altered Beast.
Okay, so this one actually is a lot more marketing type 1. Saying that the value, the quality is having a lot of great games, and by a lot of great games, I mean a lot of games. They're showing that there's games available on the console.
Sega, Genesis, the new generation in video games.
Alright, that was actually a lot better. It was shorter, it was more concise. It didn't really focus on anything of marketing type 2, association with a value, or marketing type 3, like a shocking image that sticks in your head. If anything, it was only doing the cool images thing, trying to let the visuals of games speak for themselves. That could be considered marketing type 2. But in this case, we had, with marketing type 1, mainly just the Sega Genesis saying, hey, we've got really good graphics, we've got a lot of games, there's a lot of value for your dollar here in the Sega Genesis. And to be honest, as like an opening commercial for a home gaming console, that's something that console manufacturers are still struggling with today. Game consoles at their launch have still struggle to have a library that is worth playing, that is worth investing in, because people are still developing games for the installment base, a much larger installment base of larger consoles. We saw that with the Nintendo Switch. They really had to wait until Zelda Breath of the Wild was out to start selling like hotcakes. People were buying Zelda Breath of the Wild in anticipation of getting a Switch once it came out. So it was a little bit delayed, but the Zelda game flipped the script for Nintendo. As for like Sony and its PlayStation 5, the PlayStation 4 is one of the greatest selling consoles of all time. It was the market leader in terms of its install base, and people were very reluctant to move away from that. Since then, there have been a few console sellers that did make a big splash, that did get people to convert. The option of backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 5 is a big factor of that. The ability to have a cheaper version of the console is a big factor of that, but really it was, I would say, the Demon's Souls remake and Returnal that kind of marked the turning point for the PlayStation 5. People were buying them en masse before. That was mainly just in order to flip them and create the scarcity so that the second-hand market could abuse the scarcity, the chip shortage. Anyways, I'm getting off track. This was a very good commercial. It was pretty much exactly what you want to see, what I want to see, mainly because I have a preference for marketing type 1. I don't need to tell me how to feel about a thing. I don't need to be shocked or awed or manipulated into a thing. I would much rather prefer that people just tell me what the thing is, what it's good for, and how much it costs. But the other marketing types work a lot better. All right. Let's do another. Yes! Okay, hold on. I love this. Just because the history of this commercial is so salty. Wait for it. Okay, marketing type 1 into the jingle.
Just buy any 3 Sega Genesis brand games before March and get 2 stereo speakers free.
Oh! That didn't go where I thought it went. I thought they were actually going to say the full line, Genesis does what Nintendo don't, which was the big salty like Sega punchback at Nintendo of the time. But they didn't. They just kept building the anticipation of it. And that's its own marketing trick as well. So let's get into what this commercial was doing before we get into that specifically. It was focusing primarily on marketing type 3A, which is things that will help you remember, stick in your memory by way of, say, a jingle or music. Music has been a classic marketing tool for ages and ages, before the technological era, before the printing press even. People made songs to sell products. But as they were doing that, as they were repeating, and the repetition is a part of this as well, the phrase Genesis does over and over, They're trying to get you to remember the ad that made a big splash, which is Genesis does what Nintendo don't. But by repeating Genesis does over and over with that very simple jingle that just went up a few notes, Genesis does, they're trying to get you to have that in your mind by the time you get to the store and you're deciding between Nintendo and Sega Genesis. They want you to remember the song first and have that be the thing that forces your decision, forces your hand one way or the other. But they also slipped in other value adds into that process. There was a discussion of the price. There was discussion of getting bonuses. Get 2 speakers for just this very cheap price. And it's like, well, hold on. Speakers are something a parent in the 80s and the 90s will know how to compare prices for outside of gaming. That's a good value add from my perspective. Even if I have no idea how much I should be paying for a game console, if I know I'm going to get cheaper, speakers, then maybe I will associate that with getting a better bang for my buck for the console as well. It's very sly. They're doing a lot of things with this commercial. But let me go ahead and look up what that's actually called. I don't think it's the Zeigarnik effect. It's the... What is it? Okay, yeah, actually, no. I think it is the Zeigarnik effect. Essentially, it's the idea that when there is something that is familiar, that you know as a complete whole, like a song, like a phrase, there is an immediate stress that the human brain feels when it doesn't get completed. When you're expecting something to have an endpoint and you leave it unfinished, people feel a need to finish it for you. And that's because they are trying to alleviate their own minor stress in their mind of feeling like something is incomplete, like there is something left to do. If I even just start the alphabet song A, B, C, D, E, and then I just stop and I leave it, there's going to be dozens of you at home who start singing the rest of the song or start the song over so that you can get to the end and feel complete, feel satisfied. By creating that little bit of anxiety from its own marketing, Genesis does, but leaving the blank spot at the bottom of the splash screen, knowing that something could fill that space, having music that rises but never comes to a down note, never concludes the measure. It's all from the music to the phrasing and the history of the phrase, trying to get you to feel this incompleteness and feel like you need to complete it yourself. And that psychological trick causes Sega Genesis to stick in your mind more effectively than, say, it would if they actually just finished the phrase. So by cutting up their own marketing slogan, they make it more memorable. Only after it has made a splash. You have to know that Genesis does what Nintendo don't is a phrase in order for that to work. So yeah, absolutely marketing type 3. Not just with the jingle to improve memory, but also using a little bit more sophisticated psychological manipulation to get you to remember that one. But let's go ahead and do one more and then call it a day here for the Sega Genesis. We will come back, don't worry, we'll be coming back to these. They're pretty great, they're really hostile, and that makes them even more entertaining.
He wanted the real arcade games at home, so he got them. Mike Rogers wanted them too.
Okay.
He got a Genesis system by Sega. Why? Check it out.
Oh, so much easier than buying arcade machines.
If they look the same, you've answered correctly. Besides, Genesis has real-life action in sports games, flying games, and adventure games. The hottest library going. So if you want
This is great. A completely pointless transition. Besides nothing.
Or get Genesis by Sega. We bring the arcade experience home.
Baseball.
All right, forget about baseball. I'm not focusing on that right now. That commercial was extra silly, mainly just because from my perspective, I would much rather have a room full of arcade machines than I would just one Sega Genesis and a bunch of cartridges. But, what parent is going to go for that? That's a ridiculous concept. The idea is actually marketing style number one. They're trying to sell you on what is the quality of this thing. They're comparing it to the quality of the arcade experience. They're actually giving you two side-by-side screens to make a comparison, saying that one is an arcade look, one is the Sega Genesis look, and they tell you to say that they look the same. Now, of course, real gamers will actually really zoom in on all the differences and be able to tell the difference in that splash shot. But for a television commercial, for a child who's like only half paying attention, that would be something that they could then repeat to their parents, saying, oh, it's just as good as the arcade. That would make the parent go, yes, there's a quality here. It's worth the value. It's worth getting my children out of the arcades, which at this time were starting to be more demonized by parents and by Christian groups, and that were like talking about arcades as the thing of the devil. It was a crazy time, guys. I'm glad I didn't have to go through it myself, but there were a lot of things working against arcades that had less to do with other games that were more interesting or more valuable coming out in other spaces. But they were kind of on their way out, economically speaking, in the United States anyway, even without the culture war and the demonization going on around those spaces. So yeah, the basic idea, the standard, there wasn't any like value association that you were supposed to create in terms of like who's cooler. I mean, suppose maybe a little bit. With the second kid getting the Sega Genesis, you're supposed to think, this kid was smarter. He just got a Sega Genesis rather than buying an entire arcade. Or maybe even you would say that this is, he's smarter because he bought the Genesis rather than going to an arcade. So there could be a little bit of value association with thinking that you are better than some other kind of person for making this decision. But the main thing that I really like that they did was that they said, besides, to transition into just talking about how many games are on the platform and their quality of their graphics as a kind of, back to marketing type one, when the besides had absolutely no purpose. It was not like going to raise a new point. It was not countering or adding to the previous point. Marketing loves to do this, and you'll see it a lot once you start paying attention. They'll use transition words, but the transition will have absolutely nothing to do with what comes before and what comes after. They're just trying to prime you as a viewer to feel that a transition is taking place. And once that transition has taken place, they've got you onto a new factor, a new talking point that they want you to listen to and internalize. But besides talking about these commercial why can't I do this? It's funny. But besides talking about commercial transitions, I think we should go ahead and close this one out. We'll definitely be coming back to the Sega Genesis in the future. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends. We're also going to take a moment and thank Noah West, our Dark Roast producer over at patreon.com/SocraTetris. If you'd like to support the channel the way Noah does, you can do so as well. That's patreon.com/SocraTetris. And I will see you next time when Hideo Kojima and I sit down, get really high, and stare at our hands for 2 hours straight. Thank you so much for watching, and stay true.